Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. This is Grant Cameron. I'm doing a short update called OKE Shannon Notes Update. This is a little bit similar to a presentation I just did, but there's a few added items in this one which I wanted to update on. So let's begin. The two documents that we are comparing are the OKE Shannon Notes, which is on the left-hand side. This is a cover page. There's 26 pages in total, including this page here. And the Eric Davis Notes, which is a conversation between Dr. Eric Davis and Admiral Tom Wilson, who was the former head of Defense Intelligence Agency, and also when he was given the UFO briefing that we'll be talking about, he was E2, head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Now, these two documents, the one on the right, the Davis Notes, I was given, and the request that was made to me was to make them public, to get them out into the UFO community. I was given them by Australian researcher James Rigney in Laughlin, Nevada, about maybe 8 months before they actually were noticed on the internet and the controversy started about what was in the notes. The one on the left is a series of notes taken by OKE Shannon at a top secret UFO meeting that took place at the BDM secure facility in May of 1985. I was given those notes by Dr. Eric Davis about 20 years ago, and I was told that OKE Shannon was sick, and that if OKE Shannon were to pass away, I could release the notes. I've held the notes these 2 decades, and then OKE Shannon went public with an interview about his situation, and at that point I figured that it was no point anymore in holding the notes, that the actual full story should come out as to what actually happened. Today's little presentation is further information about what actually happened between OKE Shannon and Eric Davis and Admiral Tom Wilson. The UFO situation, to me, I had a UFO sighting in 1975, but it's always been like a chess game to me. It's always been to sit there and watch the board and watch what would be called anomalies. Watch the other players move. Why is he making that move? It doesn't make any sense. What's he intending to do? What's he looking at? And going in that manner. And that's the way I look at documents, that I look at things that don't make sense in a document. And it's those anomalies that actually lead you to discoveries. And that is what Dr. Nolan talked about, who was at Stanford University, said that you watch the 5% that fall outside the bell curve and find out why these anomalies are taking place. So I'm going to point out some stuff that I noticed in these documents that didn't make sense. And then when I suddenly, the light came on and I figured out what was actually going on. And I think most researchers have missed these points in these two documents, although both the documents are public and they're circulating, and most top researchers know that these documents exist. I'll point out that the OKE Shannon Notes had a top secret restricted data signals as required on the cover page. This is one of very few top secret documents related to UFOs, and 2 of them I have pushed very hard. This is the one, and I'll be talking about the other one, which is the sort of the most ignored UFO document in the UFO world, which is extremely important. So this is a top secret document. There are only a handful of top secret documents, and this is one of them. As I mentioned, this all started when OKE Shannon here gave an interview to Jay at Project Unity, which is a very good interview. Jay went to the United States, talked to him, and he was special projects manager at Los Alamos, and he comes forward and gives an interview, which shocked me that he had given the interview, and it was at that point that I revisited my OKE SHANNON notes and decided that it might be time to put those notes out, because they are extremely important in understanding what happened in the briefing with Admiral Tom Wilson, and what happened in Las Vegas in 2002 with this conversation between the Admiral and Dr. Eric Davis. This is where it all starts. Starts in April of 1997. The guy on the left is Admiral Tom Wilson. The guy in the middle is the sixth man to walk on the moon, Edgar Mitchell. And the man on the right is Commander Will Miller. Now, Will Miller was the chief military advisor to Stephen Greer all through the 1990s, when Greer was briefing high-level officials in Washington, D.C., including the CIA director, the head of Defense Intelligence, and the J2, head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is Tom Wilson on the left-hand side. Now, what happened was Will Miller asked for our briefing to go through this UFO situation, a UFO briefing, and it would be confidential, it would be off the record. And Edgar Mitchell attended that briefing. Stephen Greer was there, and there was a couple of other people at this briefing. And Admiral Wilson was briefed on the UFO situation. So these are the main characters that played this briefing in 1997 that nobody was supposed to know about. It was supposed to be very confidential, and then it starts to leak. Here's a letter that Will Miller sent in 1995, 2 years before the briefing, requesting the briefing. He said, "I would like again to offer you the opportunity for a personal briefing at a mutually convenient time and place by Dr. Stephen M. Greer, MD, International Director for the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, Asheville, North Carolina. Since the topic is sensitive with DOD, the briefing could be informal and off the record if you desire. It would include an overview of CSETI's mission, recent breakthroughs, international developments, etc., etc." So this was in the works for 2 years. The briefing took place in 1995. Here is Will Miller actually in an interview. Now, I've suggested people listen to this interview, and I probably 1 out of 100 people that I requested in past PowerPoint presentations have listened. So today I'm actually going to play the clip of Admiral Wilson talking about giving the briefing to the Commander Miller, talking about giving the briefing to Thomas Wilson.
You know, I was pleased to be able to set up a meeting at the Joint Staff there, J2, the Director for Intelligence, back in '97.
Yeah, and what Commander Miller is referring to is the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, although they call it
right.
Staff, right, at the Pentagon.
Right. Yeah, and that was a meeting with you and me, and I think Ed Mitchell was there,
right.
astronaut Ed Mitchell, among others. And the Admiral took this briefing with the same level of gravity and interest as he would any other national security, national intelligence matter. So when folks say that the military is not interested in this subject, that is obviously not the case, and has not been our experience.
No, and in fact, I remember that we were slotted for a certain amount of time, and he kept turning to his aide saying, cancel this, cancel. It kept extending because he had tremendous interest in what was being shared.
Yes, yes. It was also a little interesting aside. As I was leaving, the Admiral's aide turned to me and said, you know, the subject of Majestic MJ-12 came up, and there's been a lot of debate as to, you know, whether that's real, whether it ever existed. And he said, you know, we know it exists. We here at the Intelligence Directorate for the Joint Staff just don't have the need to know what they do. Right. And I found that to be a very interesting statement.
A very important statement. And of course, if you look at this National Reconnaissance Office I have from the early 90s, it lists specifically MAJIC, M-A-J-I-C, and cosmic ops, and various code numbers and code names on this document, and we know it's a legitimate document, and so it was basically warning of a security breach at the Nellis Air Force Range out Pahood Mesa, S12, S4, S3, Groom Lake, where a lot of very classified research and development and aerospace activities take place related to all of this. I mean, the public has incorrectly called it in Area 51, but nobody calls it that. Who's in the know? But the point being that this document actually has that on the distribution for this alert for a security breach out at that range, and magic.
So here's another one that confirms that the briefing was given. In the room was also Mike Crawford, Admiral Mike Crawford, General Pat Hughes, date April 1997. Edgar Mitchell was there. After the group broke up, Miller Wilson talked privately for 2 hours on UFOs, MJ-12, Roswell crash, UFOs, alien bodies, etc. Thomas Wilson was intrigued. He knew about intelligence on U.S. military intelligence, UFO close encounters, and foreign government encounters. He had seen the records, and he told this to Miller. And then there's this confirmation that Miller said that Miller was told that MJ-12 existed, which I've said since 1989. Yes, the UFO documents, the MJ-12 documents, were made up documents. They were not real documents, but MJ-12 itself does exist. Now, here's the document that Admiral Wilson was presented. This is the first of 3 pages of this document that you just heard about Commander Willard talking about. And when Wilson saw the full document, he realized there was parts of this units inside this document that he was in charge of. And he was very surprised to find out that they were involved in this UFO thing. And so he went on a search to find out where the Black Ops, the UFO research was taking place, and he actually found it. And he made a phone call to the lawyers running the reverse engineering project for UFOs. And he was told, you don't have a need to know. And they basically hung up the phone on him, which made him very mad. And he kept pushing, and he was told to back off. Otherwise, he would lose a star and be demoted. And because he was at that point trying to be the head of Defense Intelligence Agency, he decided to back off after this briefing and sort of let the UFO subject go. Here's the notes. So these are the notes that have been around the world and are discussed, where Admiral Wilson goes and he agrees to talk to Eric Davis. But the interesting thing, and I think we'll bring this up later, is he talks in the middle of the document. We've got next slide. Well, it said, I'll read it here. In the slide, it said, Thomas Wilson recalled a phone call with Oak Shannon in the fall of 1999. He said, I'm a big Oak Shannon fan. That's what the Admiral said. I'm a big Oak Shannon fan, go way back in the Navy before Oak left for Los Alamos. And so this is one of the keys that I noticed, like on the chessboard. This didn't make sense. The meeting with Dr. Davis was not until late 2002, but the phone call between Oak Shannon, who had given a recommendation for the Admiral to talk to Eric Davis, and that Eric Davis was a reliable character, took place 3 years before. And so this didn't make any sense. The phone call was 3 years before, and the meeting didn't take place for 3 years. So that was the thing I was working on, actually, what had happened there. Now, in the document I just read, if you see Thomas Wilson continues, he said, this is referring to the 1999 call, 3 years before Eric Davis talked to the Admiral. Oak talked 2 hours. Now, in Oak's conversation with the researcher that he just did an interview with, he sort of mentions that, or indicates that the phone call came to him, and that all the admiral wanted to know was about Eric Davis, and he didn't want to know anything else. He didn't bring up UFOs or anything like that. He didn't talk about little green men, I think was the word. Well, he may not have talked about little green men, but it appears that there was a lot of discussion about UFOs. So the admiral says Oak talked for 2 hours on this phone call, 1999 phone call, and it indicated that he had made the phone call, that Oak made the phone call to the admiral, wanted to convince me to talk to Eric Davis about what he told Will Miller in 1997. So what he's basically saying is in 1999, Oak talked to him, and it seems to be that Oak made the phone call, and he wanted to convince Admiral Wilson to talk to Eric Davis about what he had told Will Miller. What did he tell Will Miller? Well, that was the whole thing about the crash saucers, MJ-12, all this kind of stuff. And they referenced, Tom Wilson referenced the fact that this all appeared in the Boston Globe story by Leslie Kane. Yep, he says, UFO topic, crash retrievals, bodies, etc. MJ-12, UFO organization or cabal. And the admiral was furious. And he realized that the material had been given to Leslie Kane by Will Miller. And he talks about Will Miller as being a guy who was supposed to uphold, they were both, comrades in the U.S. Navy, and that he had sort of turned him in, and he shouldn't have done that. And he was very upset that Will Miller had given this information to Leslie Kane, and she had written a story in 2000 in the Boston Globe, and Thomas Wilson's name was not mentioned, but there was indications, and all sorts of people started coming to him. This is basically what Leslie Kane put in the Boston Globe. U.S. Naval Reserve Commander Will Miller has long been communicating this same concern to high-level federal officials with over 40 years in the Navy and joint interagency operations with the Defense Department. Miller has participated in a series of previously undisclosed briefings for Pentagon brass about military policy regarding UFOs. And then at the end she says, and Miller says he is not alone in his concerns. There are those in high places in the government who share a growing interest in this subject. So he basically outed Admiral Wilson. Wilson started getting phone calls, and he was absolutely furious about the fact that this had all leaked and his name was in the middle of it. And here again, this is what they had talked about. At the end, he said, Miller asked the questions about UFO after the meeting, after this briefing in 97. Edgar Mitchell had to take a flight to New York. That's the only reason the meeting ended. But then Miller and Wilson talked for 2 more hours after the meeting was over. And Miller asked the question about MJ-12, UFO cabal, crashed UFO, confirmed that he had, he confirmed that Miller confirmed he called Miller in late 97. So Wilson calls Miller. The briefing was in April, and in June, the admiral calls Miller back, and he tells Miller that he's right. There is such an organization in existence. So he confirms, about 3 months after his briefing, when he starts to search around, he confirms to Admiral Miller that yes, there is an MJ-12, there is a control room. Now, what I would say to that, now everybody gets, that this is some sort of disclosure, but if we take a look back at the other top secret document, and because this is not an American document, it's sort of ignored by the UFO community. This is a top secret memo that was written by Wilbert Brockhouse Smith in 1950. November 1950 to the Canadian government. You take a look at this document, and he talks about getting this through American officials. He said, I made discreet inquiries through the Canadian Embassy staff in Washington, D.C., who were able to obtain from me the following information. Number 1, the matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States government, rating higher than even the H-bomb, which wasn't created till 2 years later. That is absolutely true. Everybody will confirm that was true. Wilbur Smith was right. Flying saucers exist. True. Wilbur Smith was right. It's been confirmed by the U.S. government that UAPs, UFOs, whatever you want to call them, do exist. It's real. The third point that Wilbur Smith said he had been told by American officials, their modus operandi is unknown. That is still the official position, but concentrated effort is being made by a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush. Well, that was always rumored to be the MJ-12 committee. So now we have an admission by Admiral Wilson that there is an MJ-12, that he looked and there was an MJ-12. So on point number 3, Wilbur Smith was absolutely right on both. They don't know what's going on. The modus operandi is unknown, but there's a small group that is running the program to try to back engineer and figure out what's going on. The entire matter is considered by the United States authorities to be of tremendous significance. That also has turned out to be true. Wilbur Smith was right about every single thing he put in a document that is now almost 73 years old. The fifth point, and this is one that now is starting to be discussed, and Wilbur Smith will be right about this one as well. He said right after these 4 points about what he was told by American officials, he said, I was further informed that the United States authorities, not people, secretaries, authorities, he's talking to the top people running the program. The United States authorities are investigating along quite a number of lines which might possibly be related to the saucers, such as mental phenomena. I gather that they are not doing very well, since they indicated if Canada is doing anything all in geomagnetics, they would welcome a discussion with suitably accredited Canadians. So we see that here he says mental phenomena. This is 1950 already. He says mental phenomena is part of the UFO phenomena. You get this in the UFO community is now acknowledged that consciousness is real and a factor in this UFO mystery. And if you follow Tom DeLonge, you'll see the posting that he did. This is a posting of the gate that he posted when he indicated that he had been given, had a discussion in a SCIF, in a sensitive compartmented information facility on UFOs with 3 people at Lockheed's Skunk Works, one being the president and the other guy being one of the other people being the head scientist. And he stated that the head scientist asked him, how do UFOs work? This would be 2015. How do they work? How do they get here? And Tom DeLonge had been hanging around with Stephen Greer. So he said, oh, I think consciousness is involved. And the head scientist said, now you're talking. And that's all he wanted to talk about for the next 45 minutes was consciousness. So Wilbur Smith will be right about this one as well. Now, here's something that Melinda Leslie noticed that led to some more discoveries. And this is at the top, you'll see the notes that leaked out, the Miller, the Tom Wilson, Eric Davis discussion in the car, which was in 2002 in a car behind the EG&G facility in Las Vegas, and this comes from there. And you can see that at one point, the general says, Oak told all about John Alexander. We assume it's John Alexander. AP-10 group meeting at BDM. Now, I didn't really know what this was, and I've had these notes for a number of years. And I think everybody glosses over it. Nobody really pays attention to what this AP-10 group is. So when we were doing a discussion with Melinda Leslie with her notes that she got from another member who was at the meeting, a guy by the name of Hauk, she was showing her notes. I was showing my notes from the top secret UFO meeting. And at the bottom of our meeting, our notes, which were done by SHANNON, Shannon's 26 pages of notes, he has Advanced Theoretical Physics 10, APT 10. So here you have AP's Advanced Physics 10 meeting on the top in those notes. And at the bottom, you have Advanced Theoretical Physics 10. So if people are doing Freedom of Information Act requests, the name of that group was originally known as the UFO Working Group, and it was named by the New York Times because the story started to leak. There's a book written called Out There by Howard Bloom, and he called it the UFO Working Group. And when I first released the front page of the notes for Oak Shannon in about 2003 at a conference in Eureka Springs, I showed that it was called the Advanced Physics Theoretical Conference. And so people started calling it that, but it appears the name has got to do something with 10, AP10 or ATP10. And that was a very interesting correlation between Oak Shannon's notes and the notes that Eric Davis took on his discussion with Admiral Wilson. Now, here's what Oak Shannon said in the interview. Did he, Admiral Wilson, say at all why he was seeking the background information during our conversation? And Oak Shannon says, no, he didn't, really didn't. Not to my memory, not to my memory. I think I would have recalled that. I want to check on the little green man. Davis does other things than that. Now, he didn't, as I mentioned before, he didn't talk about little green men, but he may have talked about a lot about UFOs. This is a 2-hour conversation. And according to the Admiral, Oak Shannon was trying to talk him into telling Eric Davis all about the crash flying saucers, MJ-12, all the stuff that he told Miller after the briefing in 1997. He says Davis does other things than that, but if you actually look at the Davis notes, they talk about nothing. They don't talk about anything about what Davis is doing on other things. It's one thing. Eric Davis and the Admiral are talking about one thing and one thing only, and that is UFOs, crash saucers, alien bodies, all this kind of stuff. Now, the other thing that we noticed here is this whole idea about Oak talking about the AP10 group at the BDM. So the BDM secure facility was where this meeting took place. So Oak is briefing the general in this 1999 phone call about the meeting in the secure facility at the BDM. Now, these are the Oak Shannon notes. The Oak Shannon notes are all the notes from that meeting. He describes what happened at the meeting, what subjects they discussed, who was at the meeting, all this kind of stuff. But you can see here that Oak, in the discussion with the 2-hour conversation with the general, actually gave him a briefing, gave him a whole briefing on this, what was going on, and he had his notes. He actually references Bloom's book in this conversation. Talked to John Alexander. He talks about Bloom's book, Out There, is called Out There. Oak Shannon talked to the general about his role in the meeting, who attended the meeting, who talked this top secret meeting that John Alexander was running. Oak briefed me on the whole BDM thing, on the whole discussion with what these top secret guys were talking about with UFOs, talked about the remote viewing program for 10 minutes. And if you saw the presentation I did on Oak Shannon's notes, you can see there was a briefing given by Hal Putoff to this top secret group of people on remote viewing, which would not be declassified till 1995. And this briefing, this meeting took place in 1985. So Oak is briefing him on the BDM, all the discussions they were talking about with the back engineering with Bobby Ray Inman and cattle relations, and they discussed all sorts of things in this meeting. And he talked to him about the remote viewing briefing that Al Putoff had given. Oak said that, and then in this meeting where he was trying to convince the Admiral to go and talk to Eric Davis, he said Eric Davis is a team player. He'll keep his mouth shut, no media connections, obeys all restrictions, not in government, no clearances, but his pedigree is excellent, professional, personal references, very excellent. So it's in 1999 that Oak Shannon is briefing the general on the 1985 program. And I brought this up in the last presentation. Why would he be briefing him on that? And the reason was that the general had gone out and had hit a brick wall. He could not get to the answer. He could figure out sort of what was going on, but he had been stonewalled. And so Oak is telling the same story, that the 1985 group by John Alexander got stopped as well. They could not get anywhere. They were doing all these discussions and none of them could figure out who was actually running the program. And so he was basically saying this is the same thing that happened in 1985. Now, this is one of the more important slides, one of the more important things to pick out of this. This is from, again, from the notes that Eric Davis made about his conversation with General Will Miller. So Thomas Wilson's talking. He said, I told Oak it's bad times. This is a 1999 phone call. So this is this idea, this is an anomaly. Why was there 3 years between the phone call, the 1999 phone call where Oak Shannon is trying to talk the Admiral into giving a UFO briefing to Eric Davis and tell him what he's discovered, and the 2002. So there's 3 years in between. So the Admiral says, I told Oak in 1999, it's a bad time. Time no good to talk to me. He was too busy. Said Oak was too difficult to contact anymore. Heard he was in and out of hospital, extremely sensitive to stress. Heart sickness, bad news, tried calling. Linda, who's Oak's wife, takes messages, but none return. She doesn't want much on Oak's plate for fear. He didn't say, and this is the general saying, so in 1999, didn't say yes or no to the request. So there was a request. Oak Shannon is making a request for a briefing to be given to Eric Davis. I would think on it. 3 years pass. So he actually says there's 3 years between the call and him actually retiring. So he becomes the director of Defense Intelligence Agency. He works that for 3 years, then he retires. He leaves the DIA in July 2002, and he's replaced by another admiral. So he leaves, and it's at that point that he decides that he will talk to Eric Davis and he will give him the briefing that has been requested by his good friend from the Navy, Oak Shannon. But he can't get a hold of Oak Shannon's by phone. And he describes this. He can't get a hold of him. His wife is taking messages, but none are returned. Now, we really don't know who actually talked to the Admiral and set up the meeting for Eric Davis. But one of the last things I want to point out, they have the briefing. And then when I'm looking at the background of Oak Shannon, I noticed that Oak Shannon was working with another guy who was working on fifth dimensional physics, and this idea that the beings could be interdimensional and popping in. And one of the things I noticed was that here's the memorial. So this is Ferris Williams, who you can look him up. He's got a lot of material on the internet. His stuff is pretty open as to what he was doing. So when he dies in 2015, I noticed that Oak Shannon wrote a memorial paper on Ferris William and his research and stuff. And then I noticed on that paper that one of the people that was part of this paper was Paul Murad. Now, Paul Murad is a name that if you're into UFO propulsion and if you follow the whole saga with Ron Pandolfi and the Avery and all that kind of stuff, you'll have heard of Paul Murad numerous times. His name is discussed all the time. I'm still doing work on this, but Paul Murad did this paper with Oak Shannon, and he's this UFO guy that's works on UFO propulsion, all this kind of stuff. And so I noticed that they'd both done this memorial paper for Ferris William. Now you can see here, this is a famous paper that Ron Pandolfi had helped set up the briefers. This is on high frequency gravitational waves, and it was done for the Jasons. And you'll see that Paul Murad was involved in all this kind of stuff. And there was actually an article done, and this, if you're studying the Avery, you'll know all this stuff. Gus Russo was a guy who won the Pulitzer Prize, and he was hired by Dan Smith, a rich guy on the East Coast, to do a paper on sort of the Avery, on the top guys inside the government who were working on UFOs. And so Gus Russo writes this article, and he changes all these people's names. But of course, in the UFO community, we all know it's Kit Green and it's Ron Pandolfi and stuff. But he said, here's what he wrote in the article. There is certainly a very small percentage of government officials with intelligence clearance, some active, some retired, who are interested in the UFO research community, if not UFOs themselves. Some of these men are of the impression, rightly or wrongly, that very few individuals in government and the private sector are keeping the big secret even from them. Russo refrained from releasing the names of the parties involved in his story. Starstream research has confirmed sources include former CIA analyst Dr. Ron Pandolfi, Dr. Kit Green, forensic scientist recently featured for his past work with the CIA on the PBS series Secrets of the Dead, and Dr. Paul Murad of the Defense Intelligence Agency. So he's one of these key people that Gus Russo had pointed out. And what you see is in this paper on gravitational waves that was made some news years ago. We're especially grateful to Ron Pandolfi and Mark Pessis of ODNI for their continued help in arranging briefers and documentation. They were ably assisted by Paul Fleming, et cetera, et cetera. We benefited by all these names. And then you see Gary Stevenson, Paul Murad. So Paul Murad was part of this Jason paper. And the Jasons, if you read my first book, UFOs, Area 51 and Government Informants, you'll see that all these names pop up, and that Paul Murad is part of this situation where there's insiders who know what's going on. And the last interesting thing that you will notice is that Paul Murad works for the Defense Warning Office. And if you go back to the DIRDs that were put out, you'll see these 37 papers, and you will see one called Warp Drive, Dark Energy, and the Manipulation of Extra Dimensions. And it's written for the Defense Warning Office, the same office that Paul Murad is in. And so therefore, what you have is the OSAP program was being run out of the Defense Warning Office. The ATIP and OSAP programs are run out of the Defense Warning Office, which is the same office that Paul Murad is a part of. And as we got the link, Paul Murad and OKE Shannon write this memorial paper for Ferris Williams. So you'll see it's a small world, and all these people are linked, and they go around and they have contacts, and it's much more complex than people think, but there are people inside. And if you study long enough, you can sort of follow the pieces and see how they move around. Thank you for listening, and we'll do this again soon.